everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, 5 questions with Demand Drive. And today we've got a hodgepodge of people on the podcast. It's not just me, your humble host, AJ, who is here every week, but I'm joined by a co-host this week, Alex. What's going on?
That's me. How's it going, AJ?
I'm good. I'm excited because I brought Alex on because I was going to get outnumbered by the guests this week, and I really don't like that. I want to be on even footing at most if possible. So I've got two guests this week, Matt Berman and Craig Ferrara, Demand Drive's own. And we're going to be talking about aligning SDRs and management while apart. Very topical for the current era that we live in within the sales world of working from home. So thought it would be appropriate to bring on a manager and SDR duo that we have here at Demand Drive to talk about their story and potentially help some of the listeners better understand how to align their own teams at their company. So before I jump into some of the questions, as always, I'll start by letting the guests introduce themselves. So Craig, you're first up on my little screen here. Why don't you tell people who you are? Who is Craig Ferrara?
Who's Craig Ferrara? So hello, everybody. So I'm Craig Ferrara. I am a director of client operations here at Demand Drive. Been with the organization as a whole for a little over 10 months now. And I've had been in the business development world for a while, right? It's been an interesting world, right? Over the last 10 months, we're all kind of getting used to the new normal and managing people during a pandemic. So very interested in diving into the topic today.
Yep, and I am Matt Berman. I joined Demand Drive June 1st, so it's been about 9 months or so, but all of those months I've been working with Craig on survey.com, and yeah, definitely excited to be here and share what's been working for us.
Love to hear it. Speaking of the fact that Matt has only been here for 9 months, I think that segues really nicely into the first question. Matt, you're in a really unique position where working from home is the only real professional experience you've had. You don't know what it's like to work in the Demand Drive office, let alone an office as, a post-grad professional, which is really interesting. So I'll get to you in a second, but Craig, you have obviously worked in an office before. You mentioned that you obviously have some experience. So in terms of how you're managing somebody like Matt currently in a work from home setting versus how you would be doing it in an office, what do you see that's changed? And specifically in the past, year or so that we've been in this pandemic situation, what does your management style kind of look like before and now?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you try not to change yourself or kind of reinvent the wheel to a degree, right? You want to approach people the same way you ordinarily would, but most of that is now accomplished on a video call, right? As opposed to in person. And yeah, I think that's one of the biggest shifts, right? Because I think you're ordinarily able to relay information just through kind of as you're working with people throughout the day in an office environment, right? And AJ, we talked about this a lot, and we like this term, but wanting my team in a lot of ways to sort of learn from each other, right? Yep. Not only from me, but learning from each other. And the idea of kind of learning through osmosis, where you sit next to somebody, they share a cube wall with you, and you hear what they're saying day to day. Well, that doesn't really exist anymore, right? We have to create forums. I have to create a world in which everybody can communicate the same way, but in a virtual capacity, as opposed to leaning over and being able to share a piece of information or just hearing something that someone's saying shoot, I'm going to grab that and use it for my own purposes. Right. And, I think that's something that's new. And for me as a boss, it's a lot about empowering people, and giving them the tools and the resources to recognize what could potentially make them better at the job. But, it's now creating more of the virtual form to be able to do that. So that could be through a Slack channel, which is something we're using regularly. If you don't have Slack, then maybe it's just a GChat forum or just a chat forum where everybody's using and piling into their own ideas. So we can kind of use our own shared best practices. Because, for me, trying to hear what Matt's saying on the phone needs to be scheduled now, right?
Right.
not something I can just do and pop by and listening to and making calls. So it's just being more prescriptive in how you're working with your team, setting those times up, making sure that happens, setting those meetings if necessary, and also creating the forums where everybody can collectively empower themselves to know what they can do to how to do the job better.
Yeah, I really like the way that you kind of ended that, the collective empowerment of yourself. Like you as a manager, you understand, like, I've got to change how I'm kind of enabling my reps to learn from one another and sort of level up themselves. But like, you have to communicate that to the SDRs as well and go like, hey, it's kind of on you guys a little bit at this point, now that I don't basically see you every day, or I'm not like continually in your presence. I'm kind of leaving a little bit of it up to you to do this on your own, because that's just the way it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue now, in this new world, right? Until we all are back in the office or whatever that could potentially look like, 6 months, 10 months, who knows?
So,
Right. But, I'd argue that we've created a group of reps in this new generation, right? Especially like, maybe if it's a recent college graduate or someone that's new to business development, like Matt, where like I feel like they all level up automatically. You become self-starters. We all need to become self-starters in a sense, because you don't have the capability of kind of leaning on someone unless it's a message, right? Or, or like, I'm not going to bother Craig with a Slack message right now, or I'm not going to bother a peer with that message. I'm going to try to figure that out on my own, right? And I think that that's really what we're trying to create here in a sense, is like, or what I'm seeing is these reps are just leveling up on their own without having me to push them to be that way, right? They're figuring a lot of this stuff on their own because they kind of have to. You're left in many ways to your own devices because you're sitting in your bedroom or your living room trying to figure it out right now solo. You don't have a peer you're sitting next to help answer that question for you. So automatically you kind of training your brain and creating the muscle to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and I really like the way that sort of positions the SDRs for the future. And I think it's a really interesting way to, point out like managers shouldn't be a crutch for an SDR, but if they have to be, they will be, right? So a lot of times when everyone was in the office, it was a lot easier. You leave your door open, maybe they sit right outside of it or just a couple desks away. It's super easy. Sometimes you don't even have to get up, just swing their head around and go, hey, how do I log this in Salesforce again? Oh, thank you. Like even little things like that, where it's, they know how to do that. They probably know they know how to do that, but because you've been helping them do it the whole time, it's hard for them, to let go. I guess hard for you to let go maybe too as well. But that's an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought too much about how right now new SDRs really have to do more for themselves as much as the manager can try and help them out.
True. Yeah. 100% agree.
Matt, you're the SDR in this situation. You're the person Craig is basically talking about in this instance, the colloquial SDR, the self-starter, the person who has to figure it out on their own, because you've been in a work from home environment the entire time that you've been at Demand Drive. So think about, I guess, like what it would be like if you were theoretically in the office, based on kind of, the stuff that Craig was saying. How do you think that your development would look then versus now, seeing as it's 100% remote?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Like if things happen differently and I was going into the office every single day. To echo what Craig said, like with the self-starter and like being proactive, and just trying to like experiment. I don't know if I would have had as much autonomy as I do, like just being at home in my house, because it's like there's no one else to model what I'm doing after. So like that's something I think, like maybe at first I would have been better on the phones, just being in that like atmosphere where everybody's on the phones and like you can hear people using different phrases or like their approaches to different things, or you can just like shout over to someone and say like, hey, what would you respond to this email? Like in the scenario that we're in now, you kind of have to take it upon yourself to reach out to people. And I think that's something that's made me super successful. So like I actually have to schedule time with people to talk about things, and like making that like a weekly recurring thing has been helpful. And I don't know if it would have been as like organized or forthright if we were just all in the office. Like when I first started, quick shout outs, like I had time with like Lee Baker and Pat Burns very often, just so I could like, you know, adapt what they were doing into like my style and try to implement that the best I could.
And obviously it's worked. Like you mentioned Lee, who is a member of the Demand Drive President's Club. Matt, you were just named to the President's Club. Like that's something, first of all, claps. But I think, you bring up a really good point. Like if you're trying to learn how to be the best SDR, you're going to go to the best, but like you're also in turn becoming the best by learning from the best. And you don't think that's something you would have been able to do in the office. It's kind of, to use a phrase that I think Alex or word you use a lot, behooved you to sort of start remote in that situation and sort of pinpoint who you can learn from and then adopt those styles, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think it might have been a little overwhelming too if there was like 100 people in the office and like well, who do I turn to? But it's like remotely, I can like isolate, like talking to Craig, be like, who are people that you manage that do this really well? Or like when I was training with Chelsea and she's like, hey, Lee Baker is really good on the phones. Like that's someone you should turn to. It made it really easy to just like talk to them in a vacuum and like absorb as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's an interesting perspective because, right, AJ and I started as SDRs in an office environment like that, and a lot of it really is dictated by who you're sort of randomly assigned to sit next to a lot of the time. So if you're fortunate enough to sit by some top performing reps, you're probably gonna at the very least ramp up more quickly than somebody who just happens to sit by maybe some reps that are average, that are okay, but they're not going to provide that sort of deep insight that you could get if you just happen to sit by someone who is a better SDR. So I guess I'll let you ask the actual question, AJ, but it sort of answers the third question, mystery question, about the hidden benefits of being a remote worker and being able to learn in a more I guess you're learning in a more purposeful way, right? You're going out of your way to sort of start these conversations with the people that you want to learn from.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask the question if you want, Alex, but I think it's also in relation to your guys' relationship, the Craig and Matt relationship and how that's developed, not just like your own, I guess, like personal development, Matt, as an SDR or Craig as a manager.
Yeah. I think I take even more an appreciation for people like Matt and the average rep. I've always said this, right? I always want to hire a rep with intellectual curiosity, right? The one that's going up on LinkedIn and finding talking heads like Matt, John Barrows and people like that, right? That are going out of their way to learn, right? Now, hey, that's always helpful, and those are resources you can get to even if you're working in an office, but probably now even more so. But looking and leveraging resources that are readily available to all of us to want to learn more, right? And it's on me, it's on Matt, as a guy that sort of led the way to a degree to then share those resources out to the team proactively in a Slack channel to say, hey, this is worth 10 minutes of your time. Take a read. This could help you with better, putting together better subject lines on your email outreach, right? But and those are things that are always important. I just would say it's even more heightened now where we have to get that much more creative to get people on the phone, right? I talked to a company today that does a lot of outbound outreach, and they talk about they make 1 million calls a week, right? And the dial to conversation rate now is up to about 31, right? Whereas before, pre-pandemic, it took 23 dials to get to a conversation. The average company now is seeing up to 31 dials even to get someone on the phone or get a response of any kind, right? And that's it's a different world we're living in. So what does that require? It requires even more creativity. It requires more intellectual curiosity to get better. Because the same approaches that were worked pre-pandemic aren't working now. And that's all, we all need to adjust to it. Otherwise, adapt or die, right? I think the whole mentality.
Yeah, I said it a bunch because I've heard it a bunch, but since March, realistically, like the start of all of this, engagement rates for phone and email are at all-time lows, but the volume that we're sending out messages is at an all-time high. So like there's something wrong. Like people, like the ocean is being continually flooded with more messaging. but it's all the same color. Like it's all blue. You're not getting any green or orange or yellow messages in there. It all looks the same.
Sure. 100%.
I don't think,
Yeah.
I don't think I want my ocean to be orange, AJ. That sounds.
Why not? Sounds great.
I'm not swimming in that.
Some coral reef. I don't know. That's like an orange color, right? It's not red. It's not like red tide. That's different.
Yeah.
Oh man, but no, it's interesting that you use that I guess that volume is still up, because that shows that SDRs are still putting in the work, but with engagement being low, I feel like maybe that does point to the disconnect that a lot of people have from their managers and from their peers to really be able to put in the right amount of effort and the right type of effort to make their messages stand out and really resonate with the prospects the way that they ideally would want.
Yeah. Matt, what about you in relation to sort of that question about, not just your development, but like the relationship that you have with Craig and sort of, maybe the benefits that normally wouldn't exist if you were in an office and Craig was just down the hall?
Yeah, I think it all comes down, and I think this like funnels up to just the SDR role, like what you're saying about, if the activity's there but the engagement's low, it really comes down to just being intentional with what you do. So like maybe that means you're being a little more specific with like the email you're writing, or like you're being a little more like research driven before the phone call. So like you're prepared to actually talk to who you're speaking with. I think knowing that I just can't like walk into Craig's office in the middle of the day with a question makes me come to these like every Wednesday at 10:30. I know that like I have time with Craig to ask any questions, to talk about anything that happened, and that makes the conversation probably like more efficient and more meaningful. Like we're really covering the bases, and it's not a lot of, I mean, like we do have small talk. We were talking about cryptocurrency before this was getting started, but I think just being intentional and like actually scheduling that time for the purpose of communicating, it might be something that's contributing success.
Yeah. So just like a general like preparedness and awareness of the necessity for that, the dynamic between you two kind of the way that it's been shaped around that need because of the pandemic is obviously way different than, if you were able to just casually talk to him about something. Or like, I've heard stories of people who like set up pipeline reviews, like manager to SDR, and it's 30 minutes long and they spend 24 minutes talking about the weather and sports or whatever, because it's very casual. You're both in an office. And then all of a sudden you have 6 minutes left and it's like, oh, your pipeline looks good. Get out of here. I have another meeting. So like not really super.
That's what I remember my one-on-ones being like when I was an SDR in the office. Any questions I had that I felt like were needed that day, they wouldn't make it all the way to the weekly sync or whatever it was. So I'd ask, I had a good relationship with my manager throughout the day or throughout the week. And then, the one-on-one rolls around, and sometimes we'd be like, I asked you all the questions I need to this week. We can push it if you're busy. And that's nice to do. It frees up time for both of you. But at the same time, it's not something that you really necessarily want to skip if you can help it at all, because even if you don't think you're going to go in getting something valuable, the chance that you get something valuable out of it is still pretty high.
100%. And I mean, I'd argue it's probably even more important nowadays, right? We're all isolated. Now we were talking about this, but like mental health, right, has been, a consistent thing we all got to pay attention to. And, my perspective, like what I care about first and foremost, how is Matt doing? How is Matt Berman feeling? How are you adjusting to all this, both like from the personal and a professional level, right? Because it starts there. Your head's not in a good place, right? It's something that, we got to make sure we help our best to manage around, right? And, so we've talked about this, but like you start any conversation out, we're all accustomed to just saying, how you doing? Right. And then someone says, yeah, doing fine. Yeah, good. Yeah. But no one's doing good right now. I mean, everybody's struggling with this is the bottom line. Right. And starting there is kind of like our baseline to recognize I'm not doing great either. Right. We're all human. Right. And if we start there, kind of accept that and recognize that a good portion of our interaction with our folks has got as much to do and was just as important to have kind of a personal connection as best as we can have as it relates, and then also work through anything we want to work on from a professional development standpoint during one-on-ones. Great, let's do that. But like, let's also relate to each other on a human level, because we're, a lot of us are isolated. There's a huge disadvantage to a degree, us all being remote, not having that camaraderie, and certainly something we know that's driven the success at Demand Drive, like having that culture that doesn't really exist other than through what we try to accomplish through virtual meetings. And, so even becomes even more important, in my opinion, as a manager, to make sure that everybody, within reason, that you're cognizant of how they're feeling through this whole thing, because it also plays a factor in their output and capability to be able to do the job, right?
Sure.
And, consistently being aware of that is something that I think we all should own as managers, to recognize everybody's navigating, some tough times, and, trying our best to be aware of that while attempting to try to get everybody to do the job at the same time.
It's a fine balance to strike.
Yeah.
So the way that you kind of portrayed that, it's a common thing at a lot of organizations. Management is sort of seen as the glue that kind of holds teams together. Like Craig, you said it yourself, you're taking it upon yourself to make sure that like Matt and the other reps that you're managing are okay, both work-wise, mental-wise, like everything's moving in the right direction. But you've alluded to it a couple of times, and Matt, you have as well, and I'll ask you this question. The SDRs themselves can create cohesion amongst the team on their own without the support of management, in cases like Matt's of, finding articles that he finds valuable or podcasts that he can send to the rest of the team to help everybody level up alongside him. How are Matt, you, outside of what I exactly just mentioned, kind of achieving that? And then Craig, how are you like encouraging and empowering the reps to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, it's not like a one and done type deal. Like it's a constant evolution of like, building that cohesion. And I think a lot of it comes from like, you have to understand that people have different styles and approaches, especially with sales. It's like we have these end outcomes of X number of meetings booked a month, but there's 1,000 ways to go about that. So understanding that, and like I was saying earlier, with the autonomy that comes from working remotely, I try to encourage experimentation and like trying new things out with people on the team. And I think if you anchor that in data and like what's working, and you say, what, we tried this out for 2 weeks and these are the results compared to this, maybe it doesn't work out as well. And then we try to pivot. And I think that's much more helpful than like mandating something across the board that like every single rep on the team has to do. And that's something I'm trying to learn as like a new team lead, is just trying to, like Craig said, like empower people to like be the best versions of themselves and like how they can work with their strengths to be successful.
Very cool.
Yeah. I mean, Matt nailed it. Clearly he's learning as a team lead is what I would say, right? I mean, to kind of carry off of that too, it's just helping everybody find their voice, right? And I think that's important whether we're during a pandemic or not, but like, trying your best to, like you said, experiment, like as Matt said, and through experimentation, then you find your voice and what feels right to you when doing this job, right? What makes you seem authentic. I find, bottom line, like authenticity is probably one of the most important things that we need to focus on now, especially like, recognizing that it's not just me and Matt that are struggling through the pandemic, it's the people we're calling too, and being recognizing that. So authenticity, message, obviously simplicity, authenticity, personalization are all things that we need to consistently experiment on, and I think, authenticity, it just ends up being, everything else is important, but that levels up to a degree now, especially when we're all kind of, trying to find our way through this whole thing.
Yeah, it's like I've heard a lot of empathy is sort of part of that authenticity idea, that like you need to be empathetic in everyone's situation. But at the beginning of all of this, and it's still persisted now, there's a lot of like tactical versus actual empathy, where, and you can tell it from a mile away that like, Craig, what you just said, like be authentic and sort of be empathetic. Like people will look for ways around actually feeling like that and just say it in an email or relay it in a phone call. But like you can tell when someone actually cares about what they're talking about versus when they don't and they're just doing it to potentially, you know, butter you up a bit or and get a meeting. So I think it's a really interesting point, that yeah, authenticity above everything, especially now, like actual legitimate authenticity is so important.
Yeah.
I think I forget what sales leader was saying. He was like, yeah, a lot of us function in like the B2B space, like business to business, but like at the end of the day, it's like human to human. And that's what we need to emphasize, because it's like you're on the other side of the phone is like a human just like you. And like Craig's saying, like they're going through the day and they're having struggles too. So it's important to accentuate that, you know. I don't know the right word for that, but
Yeah, so you can't look at anybody to just they're an ends to mean, you know, means to an end, right? Like, all right, this person is my lead, right? It's like, well, it's also a human that you're trying to get conversation with, right? You know, and recognizing that, and you know, I mean, at the end of the day, we really want to try to solve a need for them. I've always said this, like, you know, when we set up meetings with our clients, you know, it's with someone that could potentially have a pain. And the idea of like setting these meetings up in a way is to make them look good in the organization. Like if we can find a need or a pain that exists in the org, ultimately this person could, you know, could mean big things for them within the org too, if they can solve a problem that they've had trouble solving, right? And you know, the role of a BDR, ultimately that could be something we could accomplish on their behalf, right? In a meeting.
Right. Help, don't sell. That's my big thing.
Right.
I enjoy
No
it.
doubt.
Yeah. Cool. So we've seen what the relationship between you two and sort of in relation to the rest of the team looks like during a pandemic. Craig, you know what it was like before a pandemic. Matt, you don't, but you're learning. But you're both experiencing this now. And it won't be like this forever. Craig, you mentioned it earlier, maybe 6 months, maybe a year from now, who knows? Well, I'll go back into the office and things will kind of revert back to where they were, but they won't be exactly the same. I think we're going to change forever, not just as Demand Drive as a company, but as an industry in general. Like this relationship that you guys have will never look the same now that we've experienced what we've experienced. So I'll ask the two of you, start with Craig, then to Matt. What do you think the SDR to manager relationship is going to look like in the future, knowing what we know and experiencing what we've experienced?
Oof, that's a good question. Now I've given that some thought. I think you take a lot of what we just talked about and the things that we can carry over to what we learned, right? You know, for me, it's, you know, being more, you know, I'm setting up these one-on-ones, still making sure that those are happening and then making sure that you come prepared, as Matt talked about, like, what is it that you really want to accomplish and making the best use of that time. You know, also making sure that a good portion of that time spent on making sure that person's okay, right? Independent of whether or not we're dealing with a pandemic or not. Like those are things that I find I'm becoming more aware of. And beyond that, it's like, you know, recognizing that while I'm important, I don't have to be as important. Everybody can help each other self-manage, right? Everybody, you know, while I want to be known as a resource, I don't want to have to be like the sole person these guys need to rely upon. So what world can I create internally at the organization? We're all working there together to where just because, you know, my door's shut, you know, and they can't get to me, like they know there's other ways about going about the job the right way, and or asking peers, or in most cases, probably figuring it out on their own. You know, so I mean, I think, you know, while I don't think it would change dramatically, I just think things that we've learned from the pandemic ultimately creates more of a, you know, an empowered rep that can figure a lot of this stuff out on their own.
Matt, do you think you'll be that empowered rep?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like, it's a funny idea that I think the future might be a little less robotic. Like, I think we've kind of talked about how, especially remotely, like you need to have a little bit more compassion, empathy, and that is what kind of allows people to like feel good in their own skin and succeed. So I think that's something that will definitely be carried through into the future. I don't know. It's a tough question, AJ, with the whole future thing. I don't have a crystal ball,
Predictions for
but
the future.
I think I don't know. I feel like working remotely has definitely shown that, you know, things can be done as good or better at home versus the office, but it's also the opposite for some other things. So I feel like it's going to be like a recalibration, and it's going to be like a whole nother challenge to figure out once people start going back to the workplace. It's like, you know, what are the things that need to be done in the workplace and what could be done at home, and I think that's going to be super interesting.
Almost the mindset too, right? Where maybe we realize whether it's necessary or not, we've all proven we could be productive, but like maybe the world looks like, you know, we're better suited working in the office 2 days a week and then working from home 3 days, right? Like maybe that's like the math that needs to be done. Like, all right, the days where I can go in, I'm kind of mentally prepared to use it as a time to where we can all learn from each other. The 2 days we're together, setting up times where we can like lean on one another to learn. And then those other 3 days are spent for me to just be able to put my head down based on the learnings I took from those 2 days in the office while I was still making dials. But like also like, all right, all those learnings then going to be spent on like 3 very isolated days where I'm just making calls, right? So, you know, I mean, a lot of different directions it can go in, but I'm thinking that could be a path to go down that I'm very comfortable with. Like, and I can say that I would not say that I could say that comfortably prior to the pandemic. Like all of us feel like, oh, I only want you in my office. I want everybody in the office 5 days a week. And I think we all can comfortably say once we've made that, now that we've made that transition, the world's, you know, proven that we're all capable of working remote, that we all have to be open to the idea of Matt saying, hey, would you mind if I work from home today? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think, right.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think because the way I sort of see the future, I don't have a crystal ball either, but if I had to guess, I think it's going to be some sort of split, right? Of some people are going to want to go back 5 days a week. They want that office environment to work in. Some people are going to stay home all 5 days of the week. And then I think a lot of people are going to do, you know, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, something like that in the office, do a split like that. And that's where I think it's important for you, Craig. That was a great idea to say, like, let's come in on the same day. Let's all learn from each other. Because if you don't do something like that, then you have half the team coming in on Tuesday and Wednesday and half the team coming in on Thursday and Friday, and someone shows up on Monday. Like, you won't get that peer-to-peer interaction that we were talking about that used to be so valuable that we want to get back to again. So I think that's something that's important for managers to do. You've already got it nailed down. So good for your reps in the future. But like being able to facilitate, regardless of what kind of environment it is, being able to facilitate it for your whole team so that it's best for everyone, I think is going to become a huge part of really just any management role, even if it's not sales development.
Yeah,
almost like a cultural shift, you know, like in how work is done. Like I remember applying internships and like it'd be like, oh, remote role. Like I'm not applying to that. Well, that's crazy. Who would want to do that? But like now it's like fully valid to work remotely, and I think it's going to raise a lot of interesting questions and like different ways of doing things than we haven't thought about previously.
The average manager's got to shift their mindset now, right? Because like you said, Matt, like that job you ordinarily would have looked at as a remote role, like, I don't want to do that. No, I mean, I don't know. Everybody, you know, at least 50% of the workforce would say, I mean, I'd be open to that. I can prove I can do it. And frankly, we're all used to this now, right? I didn't even know what it'd be like going back to an office 5 days a week. It's going to take me a while to get used to that, you know, at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to get back in my car and drive. The traffic to get to my office from my bedroom is minimal at best.
Yeah, right. The best commute.
Dog gets in the way, but like that's it.
No doubt. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, do you guys have any last, just as we're wrapping up, any last like thoughts or I don't know, points of wisdom that you want to leave the audience with that outside of what we've already talked? I feel like we dove into a ton of stuff. And it's going to be a very dense episode for me to unpack and edit. So thanks a lot. But I think it'll be really valuable. So I don't know, yeah, if you guys have one last thing you want to mention to the audience before we wrap some stuff up.
What do you think, Matt? Go ahead.
I'm just going to use this time to plug our SDR symposium and stay tuned for the next one.
That's actually a really good point. One of the things that we've done, Matt came to us with this idea of having, because we're not learning through osmosis anymore, like Craig was talking about, having a monthly sort of get together internally at Demand Drive where we pull some of the top SDRs and have them talk about a specific topic. So flipping pipeline and sort of how to effectively communicate with them. That was the one we did in January. And we had 3 rockstar SDRs who gave all of their insight to the rest of the company. And, I think it was really valuable. So yeah, be on the lookout for the next one, I guess. Matt, using your time to shamelessly plug his idea. I love it.
Yep.
That's good. The only tie up I would say, guys, is, we all know, I think really the one word I would use is empathy, both prospect's perspective and your employee's perspective. Like, start there, man. I feel like that's probably that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned. Empathy and authenticity are, required at an all-time high now in terms of what needs to be done and executed upon for everybody. That we all kind of require that now. I think that ultimately will be a big driver to success as a business development rep, and what I want anybody on my team and would look for from them. And I'd expect the same. I want them to expect the same in return from me, right? So that's kind of how I would look at it. Now in this new world and getting adjusted to being remote, that's definitely the biggest thing I think I've learned through this whole thing.
Yeah, I'd echo that for sure. Alex, do you have anything you took away from this that you want to, last final point? I feel like I've never had a co-host before. So do I ask?
No,
you?
I mean, if there's one thing I took a lot away from you guys, and with AJ as my manager, and obviously we're not in the SDR role, we're on the marketing side of things here, so it's been a little different. But really, just the idea that you have to be proactive, both as the manager and the managee, I guess would technically be the word. But really to being proactive and being purposeful about what you're doing and how you're going about it is really the best way to maintain that communication and that relationship from what it was before, where you could be unintentional about it and still get your work done and get the feedback you needed. Now you really do have to be intentional and proactive, and as long as you do that, though, it can even come with some advantages. So definitely some good insights all throughout.
Nice. Love it. Right. All right, well, we'll wrap things up. Matt, Craig, where can people, I guess, find more stuff that you've talked about or written? I don't know. Do you guys have LinkedIn profiles you update often?
Yes,
yeah, Matt.
We do. Mine is Matt Berman. There's a little meditation guy in front of my name, Matt. So don't be fooled by these other Matt Bermans.
Those imposters.
Yeah, I'm the real one. But yeah, happy to talk to whoever on there.
Same deal here, yeah. Craig Ferrara, Demand Drive, look me up. Obviously I'm always open to have conversations, ways we can get better, different ways to think outside the box, right? The forum is always open.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Unsubscribed 5 Questions with Matt and Craig. Stay tuned for the next episode and subscribe if you haven't already. What are you waiting for, people? This is good stuff. This is high quality content.
What are you doing?
What are you doing?
Subscribe.
Thanks, Matt. All right. Thanks, everyone. Till next time.